Yeah, so we have a hedge fund, Ben and I. Thank you. And at the signing, I can take your money if you'd like to invest. We're having a really great year. We're down 22%, but down is the new flat, they say. So we're pretty excited. And I'm not just a hedge fund manager, I'm also an author. And the new book is Lake Success, which has a beautiful cover, really quite nice. You could see this from across LAX. It's one of those very bright books. So the hero of Lake Success, Barry Cohen, is a hedge fund manager. To be more precise, he's running a hedge fund into the ground while being investigated by the SEC. These things happen. As the novel starts, Barry decides to run away from his failing marriage, his failing fund, and his autistic son on a Greyhound bus to pursue his college girlfriend in El Paso, Texas. Now, what would drive anyone away from their family when they need him so much? Yes, Barry is what in Yiddish is called a schmuck. He is also a small-time ganef, or crook. And as he depletes his funds on his journey across the country, he also becomes a schnorrer, or beggar. See, never say you don't learn anything at a Gary Shteyngart reading. I just taught you all the Yiddish you'll ever need to know, especially if you're interested in finance. Now, people have asked me, why? Why did you decide to write a book about a hedge fund guy? Why not your usual Russian losers? Why not write more about yourself? Well, in the past decade, I became aware of the fact that a large number of the friends I'd come of age with in Manhattan were gone, displaced by rising costs to Berlin or the mid-Hudson Valley or Eagle Rock. And my friends, many of whom were fellow alumni of Stuyvesant High School and Oberlin College, worked as writers and graphic designers, academics and journalists, the heart of what used to be the creative middle class, but they were all gone. And as I walked down the now unfamiliar streets of my city, eyeing a new breed of sort of closely shaved, athletic individuals, I kept wondering, who are these people? Upon closer inspection, I discovered they mostly worked for banks or hedge funds or private equity firms. Now, I'd met only a handful of bankers in my life, but around 2012, I decided that my next novel would be about finance, since there was nobody left in Manhattan. Nobody else. And so I realized pretty early on in my research that people in finance often had a very different view of reality than most of the people I'd previously known. An older currency trader at a massive bank, I'm not going to mention UBS by name, but complained to me of the struggles in the middle class, and when I asked him to define the middle class, he spoke of struggling people like himself, people earning between $2 and $4 million a year. So when it was time to cobble together a character like Barry Cohen, who makes a lot more than $4 million a year, I kept thinking back to all the wonderful, deluded people I'd met along the way. So let me read you a chapter from Lake Success and introduce you to Barry Cohen. So he goes on a Greyhound across the country. This particular scene is set in Atlanta. Yay. It's about midway through the book, and Barry gets off the bus in the middle of his journey to visit his protege, Jeff Park, whom he actually fired from his hedge fund at one point. And he's also almost run out of money. He's left New York with nothing but a rollerboard full of watches, because he collects watches. And he had to get rid of his credit cards for certain reasons. So he's in Atlanta to beg Jeff Park for a little bit of a bridge loan to fund his Greyhound ride across the country. That's him being a schnorrer, by the way. Begging for money is schnorring. Good, I feel good. Okay. Jeff Park's living room was as palatial as the entrance to a modest New York museum. Enormous golden lights hung from the ceiling, which was at least 20 feet in height. Jeff had a full head of hair, gums that didn't recede, and he did push-ups in the middle of the day. He had gone to Cornell, but had not played lacrosse like most of the guys in Barry's shop, and like me and Ben. So what's up, Barry? Jeff said, just passing through? Decided to look me up? They were sitting in Jeff's kitchen. He had brought out a bottle of Yamazaki 20-year and was serving it straight up. Quite decadent for 1:27 p.m. What the hell did Jeff Park do for a living? He had cashed out of Barry's hedge fund with zero. All of this is going to sound crazy, Barry said. Uh-huh. I'm on a journey by bus. Barry knew that he would eventually have to explain his flight from New York to people in his tax bracket. He knew that news of his meltdown would immediately form the latest bulletin in the incestuous, bloodthirsty world from which he had sprung. But he doubted it would really surprise anyone. The people in his world could be nuts. One fund was essentially a cult with its own Bible, ritual mind control, and feats of strength. One fellow at another fund, a quant billionaire in training, played piano at a third-rate bar while passing around a tip jar. Like your first ankle monitor bracelet or your fourth divorce, the occasional break with reality was an important part of any hedge fund titan's biography. The things I've seen, Barry said, and he told Jeff a few of his Greyhound adventures so far. Jeff Park seemed interested. He poured more drinks, although he insisted Barry chase his with water. It sounds a little bit like you're doing a middle-aged version of On the Road, Jeff said. Like the one-eyed Mexican guy in New Jersey you said fell asleep on your shoulder? That's pretty Kerouac. That's exactly right, Barry said. Oh, no wonder he had picked Jeff Park to host him. The man had literary sensibilities beyond most of his colleagues. They really did a good job of educating up at Cornell. I used to take the Greyhound to visit my uncle's family in Savannah, Jeff said. Everyone there looked at us like we were freaks. Everyone looks at me like I'm a freak. You kind of are a freak, Barry. Barry took that as the highest of compliments. He was bonding with his former employee, whom he had fired. They were going to be friends. So are you from around here originally, he asked. Yep, I moved back down to take care of my parents. Your parents are, I want to say, from China. Close enough, Jeff Park said. My wife is Indian, Barry said. Rock, Jeff said. You ought to get married, Barry said, completely forgetting that his own marriage was but a team of 7 lawyers short of kaput. His instinct to help Jeff Park was overwhelming. He remembered his wife's friend, the Asian woman from Brooklyn, Tina or Lena or something. I threw away my cell phone, Barry said. Can I check something on your computer? A laptop was opened up. It had been a week since he had touched a keyboard. He brought up his wife's profile. What a gorgeous family you have, Jeff Park said, pointing at the profile photo of his wife and son. When I worked for you, I think you were just about to get married. That kid of yours, God, those eyes. Yeah, Barry said, his hand frozen on the keyboard. But here's what I really wanted to show you. He scrolled to the list of Seema's friends until he found the right one. Now this girl is spunky, Barry said. She called me a tool to my face. And I think she's pretty intellectual like you. Oh, one night in Brooklyn, she made these great Chinese dumplings for us. I bet your folks would love her. Mina Kim, Jeff Park read off the screen. Ah, not really up my alley. Barry was heartbroken. But she's Chinese. Jeff Park stared at him. Yeah, I'm more into the Southern Belle type, he finally said. Barry sighed. But thanks for looking out for me. You're like that woman from Fiddler on the Roof. Barry sort of knew what he was talking about. Matchmaker, matchmaker. Jeff Park had a wide cultural reach. Well, I'm going to make it my mission to get you married, he said. Nice guy like you. I'm not averse to the ladies, Jeff Park said. I've designed this place with them in mind. Huh. How so? Jeff Park took him on a tour, starting with a massive glass-top dining table. You see these lights, he said, pointing out a trio of Sputnik-style globes hanging over the mirrored surface. The average girl I date is 5'6", or an inch taller than the national average. I have a spreadsheet that lists the attribute of each girl I've ever dated. It's super granular. So if I'm making her dinner and she's standing here waiting for me, talking to me, maybe having a drink, the light from these lamps is directly level with her eyes. She can see better, and I can enjoy her glow. Barry was impressed by Jeff Park's thoughtfulness. A spreadsheet. The rap on guys in finance was all wrong. They cared too much. He knew he did. If you looked at it a certain way, he had abandoned his family because he didn't have the emotional bandwidth to accommodate their special needs. He examined an enormous couch. This sofa is the perfect height for a 5'6" woman, Jeff said. When she sits down, the sofa waterfalls at the back of her knees. He invited Barry to sit down. You see, there's a gap of at least 3 inches between the back of your knee and the couch because you're tall. But if you were a 5'6" woman, you'd be completely snug. So you only date women of that height? Barry asked. Well, there's some variance, Jeff Park said, maybe half a sigma. I don't want the tail wagging the dog, but yeah, mostly. You're a romantic, Barry said. Jeff Park shrugged and blushed. He was not unhandsome. His face was chiseled and tanned to perfection. The black athletic gear he was wearing made him look like a glossy seal in human form. Only the Rolex Sky Dweller on his wrist did not appeal to Barry's taste. Upstairs, Jeff had an airy office with full view of Atlanta's Midtown. Barry felt a twinge of passion at the sight of a fully operating Bloomberg terminal. Jeff Park only had one screen going, which was cute. On a glass board, he had sketched out some trades that appeared exceptionally long-term and cautious, making some kind of play around Alcoa and Dow. Just scanning the numbers on the board, Barry assumed an AUM, assets under management, of 35 million, which in the best of worlds brought in, what, a couple $1 million a year? He probably had a net of 10, 15 million. And he could live on that and be happy and buy couches that waterfall the legs of median women. I trade maybe 2 hours in the morning, Jeff Park said, and then I spend the rest of the day working on myself. I read at least 100 books a year, and if I'm at, let's say, 70 by November, I'll take the rest of the year off to catch up. I like reading books of the girls I date, Beckett plays, Chekhov stories, Shakespeare sonnets. Believe me, they ain't eat culture around these parts. Wonderful, just wonderful, Barry said. This is what I'm talking about. Real self-improvement, a vocation and an avocation. So many guys say, I want to die at my peak net worth, Jeff Park said. But not me. Clearly not, Barry said. Jeff now led him into a bathroom. They were looking at the double mirrors that function as TVs in the rain shower tub. I don't know, I find that sentence funny. I don't know what. Rain shower tub. The GOP convention in Cleveland was in full blaze. Ted Cruz was saying he would not be voting for Hillary, but he wasn't going to endorse Trump either. I used to stay at the Trump Hotel in Columbus Circle whenever I visited New York, Jeff Park said. Never again. I'm a moderate Republican, Barry said. Socially liberal. I'm on a Greyhound bus, for Christ's sake. Yeah. They went downstairs for a new course of drinks. Jeff Park was making them with ruby red vodka and Seagram soda now. They sat at a table made from the cross-section of a giant tree. Its height was also designed to seduce an average woman. Barry felt around the serrated bark of the edges. He liked his furniture slightly rustic with hints of the arts and craft movement. That was supposed to be the motif of the Rhinebeck house if he ever finished it. Who made this? Barry asked. It's a Japanese eucalypti, Jeff Park said. I bought it in Kokura. It reminds me of how lucky I am. Kokura, Barry said. Yeah, you never heard of the luck of Kokura? Barry shook his head. Well, August 9th, 1945, an American bomber was headed to bomb Kokura on the Japanese island of Tinian, but too much cloud cover over the city that day, so the plane was diverted to Nagasaki. Wow, Barry said. Lucky for Kokura. Right, luck. See, if I were born in, I don't know, Bangladesh, let's say, to a family of rag pickers, would any of this happen? He gestured at his 4,500 square feet of property. My mother worked as a maid in Buckhead when they got here. I still remember the food stamps with the drawings of the old whiteys signing the Declaration of Independence. I memorized the words on it, U.S. Department of Agriculture food coupon. Where else could a maid's son end up like this? That's why I always take care of my folks, why I'll always live in the same town as them. I've got to honor the luck that was given me. Barry thought of his own relationship with his parents. His mother had died in a car accident when he was 5, and he had bought out his father's swimming pool company for $4 million, about 10 times what it was worth, so that his dad could finally retire. But after that gesture, and after his father's openly racist behavior at his wedding, he mostly avoided the old man. He went out just once to La Jolla, California, where his father was living with his girlfriend Netta, whom he had found on an online Zionist forum. Netta was a former social worker and had 2 grown kids in LA. The moment she met him, she grabbed Barry and pressed him into her freckled décolletage and proceeded to give him a detailed tour of her beautiful garden, where she and Barry's father spent most of their time drinking coffee and looking at their laptops. Her house was a 1940s U-shaped ranch with back-to-back fireplaces, wild beehives in the pepper trees, little gardens of shiso leaf and miniature roses, 2 box turtles, and a rabbit named Sylvester. There were plums that Netta's kids used to throw on the streets to watch them get run over, and blood orange shrubs in the front yard. And in the middle of what even the Holy Bible would have to acknowledge to be the true Garden of Eden, sat 2 elderly people in their Make America Great Again caps, silently scrolling through the latest outrage to their common gene pool in the dusty hills and valleys of another land. "I'm so sorry about your son getting autism," Netta had said. "Did you give him vaccines? I'm sure that's what did it." "I told him not to get the vaccines," his father hollered from his perch beneath a plum tree. "I sent him the link about how the Somalian Muslims were spreading it through their doctors in Minnesota." Barry was out of there in less than 36 hours. 8 months later, his father was dead of pancreatic cancer. Maybe Jeff Park was just a better son, and maybe better sons made for better people, and that was why their moms didn't die in car accidents, their faces caked in blood. "But that's not luck," Barry said, returning to the theme of the conversation. "Okay, sure, it's helpful not to be born to rag pickers in Bangladesh, but most of your success was a result of your own hard work and your parents' gumption to move here." "You don't consider yourself lucky?" Jeff Park said. "Not for a minute," Barry said. "I never had any advantages. I wasn't even lucky enough to be born an immigrant." Jeff Park laughed. "Now that's funny," he said. So now we're going to skip ahead a little bit toward the end of the chapter. Now, a lot has happened. Barry and Jeff's bromance has truly grown. They've compared watch collections, which is what people in finance do when they really like one another. And they've been all over Atlanta, and the previous night, the 2 of them went to Buckhead, which is a wealthy suburb, to watch the GOP convention in Cleveland. After their wild night out, Barry put his hand on Jeff Park's shoulder in a very ambiguous way on the ride home. And this leads to all sorts of problems between them the next day. And one last thing about this part I'm going to read. Barry is being investigated by the SEC for trades on 2 companies, ValuePro and GastroLux, which have hiked up the prices for certain medications. And Jeff Park's father was on one of those medications. It was early morning, raining. The Atlanta skyline was covered in gloom. Barry carried his sorrow before him. "Yeah, so I think it's time for me to shove off," he said. Jeff Park was popping nuts into his mouth for breakfast and sipping on a macchiato. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, gotta head to old El Paso," Barry said. "See an old friend, an old girlfriend." Jeff Park smiled. "Props to your wanderlust," he said. Barry set himself up on the counter. "Yeah, this is going to sound embarrassing," he said. "I'm going to need a tiny bridge loan to get me to El Paso. I don't have access to my funds at the moment. It's complicated. Maybe $2,000? "I can't do that, Barry," Jeff Park said. That hurt Barry right away. "Why not? You've accommodated me for this long. This is just a loan." "You're welcome to my house, always, but I can't stake you." "Who's talking stake? $2,000. That's 4% of the cost of your Rolex Skydweller. I feel like I'm getting mixed signals from you." Jeff Park looked down at his lap. "You fired me, Barry," he said. So there it was, finally. "It wasn't me," Barry said. "It was Akash Singh. Everything at that fund happens because of Akash Singh. I'm just a figurehead." You were there. You invited me out to breakfast at Casa Lever, and when I got there, it was just you and the lawyer. What did the lawyer say? I'm afraid we're going to have to part ways? Yeah, but that's how it's done, Barry said. That's the legal way. You didn't say one word to me, Jeff said. I wasn't allowed to say one word. And I thought of you almost as something like a mentor. Barry sighed. I'm in genuine pain, he said, so much of the time. Doesn't that deserve something? Attention must be paid, Jeff Park said. What? Death of a salesman. Not right now, Barry said. I wish you'd been straight with me, Jeff Park said. What do you mean? You don't have any credit cards. You don't have a cell phone. You travel on a bus where you can pay for the tickets in cash. Is it that Gastrolux trade? I mean, have you been subpoenaed? Are they after you? Did you get your Wells notice yet? I didn't do anything wrong, Barry said. It's a witch hunt. The government is after anyone who makes money, anyone who has friends. My father used hydroandotone, Jeff said, the diuretic. Frankly, he can't live without it. I don't follow, Barry said. Value Pro? Huh? A month's supply went from $30 to $700 as soon as Value Pro, of which you own 20%, bought the company that made the drug. Jeff Park paused as if to let that figure register. But Barry had heard it all before. Prices went up. Shareholders profited. What part of capitalism didn't Jeff Park understand? And I've got money, Jeff said, so I got my dad covered. But that's how I think of people like you. I always have the same visualization. I start with a row of middle-class houses, like the one my dad lives in, and then I see you. You go from house to house, from family to family, and you take money from their wallets, from their purses, from under their sofa cushions, and you put it in your pockets. And when your pockets are full, you put it in a duffel bag with the logo of your fund. You don't sneak in, you don't break in, you just walk amongst these people as if they're invisible. And you take the money they've earned. And then you go home and you buy yourself a watch or whatever. You own a Patek 1018 in rose gold, Barry said. That's worth over $1 million. I'm not blameless, Jeff said, but I have my limits, and I know who I am. See, Barry said, that's what I'm trying to find out on this journey, who I am. Sure, Jeff Park said. And then when it's over, you can tell people about it. I'm sorry? You can tell them the story of how you once took a bus across the country. You can tell them about your journey. Jeff Park's Bentley entered the exciting world of Atlanta's downtown. They passed the red-eye bail bonds and the Atlanta DUI Academy. A group of men had gathered outside the bus station to stare each other down with maximum malice. Be careful, Jeff Park said. This bus station has a bit of a reputation. The men outside were whooping it up about the car. Bentley, they shouted. I hope you find your 5'6" woman, Barry said. Jeff Park stuck out his hand and Barry shook it. You're going to turn out better than me, Barry said. He grabbed his rollerboard and got out of the car before Jeff Park could say goodbye. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Well, fun to do those voices. I could just picture those two guys. I have pictured them. I spent all these years hanging out with hedge funders, and that is exactly how they are. So yeah, I'll take some questions or complaints if you have.
We'll do Q&A. I just ask that you repeat the question because they don't have mics.
Oh, of course. Repeat the question, yeah.
Keep them questions, not sermons or questions.
Or, instructive sermons, yeah.
Two quick questions.
Yeah.
When you're writing, does your head say you're a little failure, or do you say I'm funny and I am brilliant? Or as you're writing, and then fix it.
So do I internalize my mother or not, is the question. A Little Failure was her nickname for me. It kind of stuck. It was a very adorable name. Yeah, thanks, Mom. I started writing because I was a lonely kid. In America, I didn't speak no English. When I spoke, I had an accent. And it was a brutal Solomon Schechter type environment where in 1981 you did not want to have an accent. So I started writing. And when I wrote, there was no accent. There was absolutely. And I showed these kids my books. And they were little novellas, 70, 80 pages. And that's how I made my first American friends. So writing was the first time I ever felt, good about myself. Felt like I belonged to this country, my mother wasn't around. It was just me and the words. And that's persisted to this day. It's one of the few times where I do feel a great sense of, it's not that writing is easy, but you do get carried away and you enter a space where it's just you and the words. But I also, I also like to make myself laugh. So that's a big part of it too. Yeah, because I live, half the year I live in the country where it's, there's only the sheep around me and they're funny. Yeah, but often I'm just sitting there in a little cabin in the woods and just cracking myself up, It's a living, as they say. And the second question you had, yeah?
It's more serious. You terrify me and thrill me the way Margaret Atwood does.
Oh.
I read Superstar True Love Story.
Mm.
Do you know something about the geopolitical Chinese future? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was so brilliantly funny and yet so terrible.
Yeah, no, most of it's already happened. I mean, it was... Yeah, it was 2010, and I thought, what if, social media brought about a crypto-fascist regime around the world? Well, I thought it would happen, maybe 30 years from now, but 2018 is all it took. So you're welcome. Yeah. Yeah, I'm the Nostradamus of 2 weeks from now. Yeah. I predict I'm going to have a steak pretty soon. Yeah. Sure, you're welcome. Why did I make the child autistic is the question.
Why did you name the child Shiva?
Shiva. Well, Shiva is the destroyer and destroys Barry's conception of what his child should be. Well, I've always been fascinated by autism. And going back to what we were saying about growing up, autism is a communication disorder at heart. And not that I'm going to self-diagnose myself, but, I couldn't read social cues at all, partly because of the language barrier. So when I look back at who my friends were, the misfits at the Solomon Schechter School, I think quite a few were on the spectrum. The behavior is, so much of the behavior, including things like stimming, flapping, all this stuff was happening, and we didn't really know what it was back then. But I realized that I was always drawn to people like that. And in adulthood too, and writing about hedge funds, all they do is say, oh, this guy's an ass-bee, you're an ass-bee, everyone's saying that everyone's on the, on one end of the spectrum. But the kinship continues, and some of the brightest people I've met are clearly autistic. And I mean, the highlight of the last 2 years was hanging out with Temple Grandin for a while, who is hysterical. I mean, this is the thing, is all the stereotypes people have about people on the spectrum drawn from, Rain Man and all this other received wisdom is just not true. Temple Grandin is incredibly verbal and incredibly funny. We got really smashed, too. We had a lot to drink. And I thought, wow, this is the kind of person I myself feel very calm with, So, and also a lot of the hedge fund people I met, their ideas, many of them came from lower middle class families, sort of like my own, and always on the periphery of things, be it New York or LA or Moscow or Naples. And with very difficult parents, usually, mothers who didn't love them became a huge trope. I took out the middleman by killing off his mom to begin with. In a car accident dramatically. But, and so, for them, having a perfect family became this endless goal. And so Barry marries somebody much younger than him, this beautiful woman, Seema. And as he says in the book, I married you for your young eggs. He literally had it planned out. And not just beautiful, but, these hedge fund guys like to also marry somebody who's incredibly well-credentialed. It's not the Mad Men era of marrying your secretary. No, she has to have a medical degree or be a managing director at Goldman or something really huge. And then to say, well, my wife was really smart and that I took her off the market because, I can afford to. And in many of these meetings, you'd go to dinner with them, and the wife, I would be like, the brain trust is the wife, and she's basically stuck curating her family in an almost feudal way. But for the people I met, many of whom had kids who were on the spectrum, this seemed to be just the dream of perfection was shattered. and they didn't know quite how to deal with it. None of them got on a Greyhound bus and fled. That requires an extra schmuckiness that only Shteyngart heroes can have. But that was the impetus for creating somebody. And Barry himself styles himself as the friendliest man in the room. But as the novel, without giving away too much, as the novel continues, you see how he got to where he is, and that reveals certain things about him. Yeah. Oh, yes, starting here.
I was wondering if you could speak to the research process.
Sure.
Researching this world.
Yeah. Nope. Yeah, I spent 3 to 4 years hanging out with hedge fund guys. Oh my God. If anyone can lend me a liver, I could use one. The drinking was out of control, especially in 2017 when all these funds began to slip, huge losses. And I remember I came home one night, 5 in the morning, and I couldn't unbutton my own shirt because I couldn't figure out how all the digits worked together. And my wife had to do it for me, and it was really embarrassing. But it wasn't just that. There was a sense of, I went to the Stuyvesant High School for nerds and stuff, and so many of the people I met were from my 25th high school reunion. Half the people worked for hedge funds or private equity. And, oh God, someone says. But, hanging out with these guys was exactly like being back at Stuyvesant, where, it was 3,000, mostly immigrants, stabbing each other in the back, fighting for each 1/1,000,000th of a basis, of a point on your GPA. I still remember mine, 86.894 to the thousands. I remember it. And now they were doing the same thing, except they were sitting at their Bloombergs, dealing with basis points. So that journey felt very, very familiar to me. But the sad thing is, and look, the book is about hedge funds, but it really is about families. That's the subject that interests me the most. How do you deal with, your partners, your parents, your children, now that I have a kid myself, and there was a huge sadness there because they spent their whole day battling each other on their Bloombergs. Then, instead of hanging out with their families, they'd play poker against each other. They'd keep making bets against one another. It's an addiction, I think, But it also kept them from dealing with all of the stuff that Barry is also trying to run away from, And it wasn't a happy time researching this. And then I got on the hound, as we call it, or the dog. And I saw I went across the country, much as Barry does. And I actually met remnants of the middle class across the country. The real middle class, because in the coasts, it's almost impossible to find that. It's very hard. But for example, I fell in love with the city of El Paso, Texas, and I spent a lot of time there. And there's about 70 pages in there. And I hung out with a lot of people from UTEP, University of Texas at El Paso, which is a kind of school that has, most of the kids are first-generation college kids, and a lot of kids also commute 10, 11 hours from Ciudad Juarez, the border city across in Mexico, So can you imagine what it takes to commute each day for half the day just to get to your college, and then think of what, our president's famous escalator speech, it boggles the mind. But, but these people lived pretty well, because you can live well in El Paso for very little, big houses. But they were happy because they saw the concrete change in people's lives that was because of them. It wasn't abstract numbers on a screen, And I think that's been lost in a big way because of the financialization and technologization or technization, I don't know how you want to call it, of what, of places like New York and San Francisco. I think a lot of that has been lost because what people want is this endless competition. Nobody wants to be the ophthalmologist in their hometown or whatever. Things that were middle class that people aspired to, where they interacted with people and felt good about one another. So it was a kind of a depressing thing. I poke fun of it endlessly in this book because I can't write a book that's just going to be depressing yet. Give me another 2 years of this. But, that was the big sort of takeaway I had in going around the country. Yeah.
So what's the story with the Ben Stiller video? How did you get Ben Stiller?
How did I get Ben Stiller is the question. Well, we're just friends. I don't know. We worked on some things together. And he's really funny. That was like a master class in improv comedy because, we had a script, but he's like, do you mind if I do whatever I want? I'm like, yeah, go crazy. So like that scene where he goes, bro, you might be wondering, what is a hedge fund? And he throws He was supposed to catch it, but it fell. The ball fell, and he just went straight with it. You know, he didn't say, "Oh my God, so sorry," which is what I would have done. Oh, he just kept going and going to make it look like, you know, because he's such an incompetent hedge fund manager, we both are, that he missed the ball because he can't catch it the same way he can't run a hedge fund. I thought that was genius, and it happened in the snap of a second, you know, and that's real artistry, I think. I love that guy. Oh.
In the course of your research, talking to all these hedge fund people, did you meet any of them who were genuinely happy with what they were doing? And if so,
Yeah.
what was that group of people? What was the secret, or why?
Did I meet any people who were happy with what they were doing in hedge funds is the question. I met a few, you know, so the people that I became quite close with a bunch of them. I became like the hedge fund whisperer, you know, because frankly, they're kind of sick of each other too. All they do is compete with each other, and they have no relationship with their wives and children. So, you know, I became like the guy they would hang out with and get drunk, and their uttermost secrets would come out and stuff like that. And I'd be like, yeah, keep talking, you know. And then I'd run to the bathroom and write it all down, you know. But the ones that were, I think, happiest were, because a lot of them were quants, so a lot of them were not the Wharton type, but were more like in the lacrosse type. They were nerds who had PhDs in math or physics, stuff like that, you know. And they became closer to me because many of them did see at least the intellectual part of this and had actually written books before they entered Wall Street about the intellectual aspect of, you know, the quantitative part of making bets. But I think slowly the environment, the lacrossiness of it got to them. And I think even though they, you know, and many of them said, you know, I wanted to be X, Y, or Z. Barry wanted to be a writer. You know, that was his dream. But instead I became this. And now it's how do I get out? You know, very few of them saw an exit strategy. Even as their funds were blowing up and this was a good time to say to the investors, thank you very much, here's your money back, I get to keep my, you know, 100 million, everything's fine. But they found it very hard to do that. But no, it wasn't a laugh fest, I would say. And they also lived these very moated existences. So they had a gigantic apartment on the Upper East Side, then they had their office in Midtown, then they had their club in Midtown, then they had their, you know, Hampton's Place. And so I would take them to restaurants, the restaurants I love, like in Korean, Indian restaurants that, you know, and they would be amazed because their clubs serve really shitty food. And they'd say, holy crap, this kalbi costs the same as, you know, as a half a drink at my club. And it's delicious. So they felt like I was like their, you know, their guide to New York. I almost felt like being, and this is the Empire State Building, which has no hedge funds. So you might not be interested in it, but it's Art Deco, you know, in case your next home has an Art Deco motif. Or you could probably buy it, you know. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, back there.
Yes, did hanging out with these hedge fund guys affect you, or another way of saying, how did it affect you?
How did it affect? Well, how did hanging out with the hedge fund guys affect me? As I mentioned, the alcoholism really ramped up quite a bit. And I'm Russian. I mean, if I'm drunk out of my mind, then you're really piling on the drinks. Well, I started thinking about money quite a bit because I grew up pretty poor. You know, we had food stamps and Section 8 and all that stuff. And we were the poorest, so all the Soviet kids were the poorest kids in Hebrew school by far. And I thought, God damn it, I'm going to make a lot of money when I grow up. I remember watching the movie Wall Street thinking, yeah, why did they arrest Bud Fox? Just insider trading, you know. So I was a true believer, very Republican, you know, like many Soviet Jews. And then, of course, Oberlin happened, so, you know, that took care of all of that really quickly. They were like, you will not like money anymore. I was like, woo. Like, you're going to be a writer now. I was like, all right, whatever you say. But, you know, I mean, I've been lucky enough to make a living off of writing, and you know, my wife has a decent job, so I've never, a lot of my writer friends, journalist friends, et cetera, like, the ones I said who have had to leave for, you know, the Abu Dhabis and the Eagle Rocks, you know, and it's a struggle for them to you know, to make something, to create a family. I mean, they just can't do it. So, but at the end, I almost became allergic to money because I realized that after a certain point, it doesn't help, it hurts. It just distances you from others. So I thought, I'm never going to make a lot of money again. You know, that was my My Yom Kippur resolution, right? I mean, you have to make money. You have to support a kid in Manhattan. Good Lord, everything's very expensive. But I really felt like I don't need anything else. I'm pretty happy because I saw the end result of this endless pursuit of money, and it wasn't that attractive to me. So it kind of took me away from growing up in the 80s in sort of Reaganite America, which was where I first fell in love with money.
The difference is that hedge funds is really mega wealth.
Right.
Beyond wealth.
But I'm saying that beyond in New York, if you're a doctor or a lawyer, you're just a loser, or even like a managing director at a bank is considered nothing. You got to be in a fund. You got to have your own fund or be a top portfolio manager in a fund. But there's studies that have shown that people who win the lottery or people who lose a limb, so something great, something terrible, in about a year and a half, their happiness level returns to exactly where it was before. That's all it takes. You're like, oh my God, I have this now. And in just a few years, that mega wealth or that mega loss kind of comes out in the wash. And that's something to think about, as we strive for things. Philip Roth had a great sign, and he worked in Connecticut in his little cabin, and he had a sign above his desk that said, "No optional striving." And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. He was the very first writer I ever met when my first book came out. I'm a huge fan of his, and I came to him. It was at the restaurant called the Russian Samovar in Midtown, and so I was drinking vodka, and I came to him and said, "Mr. Roth, I have my first book coming out. Any literary advice you can give me would be really appreciated." And he said, "Son, don't eat butter." And I thought that was so great, because instead of some pretentious bullshit about, do this, interiority, blah, 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 he just wanted me not die of cardiovascular disease. And I never ate butter again. And look at me now. Yeah, pretty sporty. Pretty sporty. Yeah, sir.
Two things. Did you ever read The Tourist by Jeff Hobbs?
No, I have not read The Tourist by Jeff Hobbs, is the question. Okay.
A similar group of people who went to Ivy League schools, and they became hedge funds. And they're miserable, and they don't ever get out of their misery.
Yeah, they're miserable and never get out of the misery. I'll say something funny also. I taught at Princeton, which is Barry's alma mater. I taught writing at Princeton, and so many of the people in my classes would write stories about how they would be miserable Goldman Sachs PMs, MDs, managing directors. And then they'd go to Goldman Sachs. And I'd say, buddy, if you are writing this story, and they all had, and there's a story like this in this book that Barry himself writes about how he's in love with this sort of hippie girlfriend that he has at Princeton, and then he sees her, 20 years later, and he says, why did I become this monster? I should have just lived on a farm in Vermont with you, So they knew that this was going to happen to them, and like sheep to the slaughter, they would just do it anyway. Because I think if you go to Princeton, you have to work in finance. It's what you do, or Duke, or any of the other schools we just saw on the screen. Yeah.
They're different from Oberlin, Bard, Swarthmore.
At Oberlin, most people are raising turtles on the Oregon coast. That's considered a really high-stress profession, because you're like, oh yeah, 7 turtles. Whoa, where's the 8th turtle? Never mind, I'm just going to go to sleep. It was a great school. It changed me profoundly. I'd be a coked-up lawyer somewhere without Oberlin, instead of a stoned writer. Yeah. Yes, in the back.
You've asked the questions. What's the answer?
There's no answer. So this is, I was just doing a nice show with Michael Silverblatt. You guys know him? An LA treasure, bookworm. And the Silverblatt and I were pondering this precise question. Because McSilverblatt asked, Gary, you've identified the problem, what's the solution? And I said, I don't know. And I said, many of the writers I admire performed a very journalistic task without moralizing. They infused it. It wasn't just journalism, it was fiction, obviously. But then when they started to prescribe things, that's when their fiction really fell apart. I'm not comparing myself to a genius like Tolstoy, but I do find Tolstoy's writing falls into that category. First observing beautifully in all the grand novels, and then really going off the rails and saying, I got the solution to all this, and then starting the Commune and Yasnaya Polyana and all that crap. So, you know, and he's not the only one. I think there's a real big danger in, I mean, obviously I have my own set of political beliefs, and I feel pretty strongly about them, and also about, I'm not especially happy with where things are going in this country. But, you know, it's okay to write about characters undergoing this and to put it in through them. But for me to come up with a solution, honestly, I don't know. I mean, yes, there's obvious solutions. Read more books. Don't do social media all day long, you know. I jumped into my pool with my iPhone in my pocket and it exploded. And this was in the country upstate, and it took, for some reason, 10 days to get a phone because they can't make them up there. And those were the 10 most exciting days of the last, well, since 2007 when the iPhone came out. I mean, it was incredible. I realized I had friends that I could talk to. And I started talking to them, and I was looking in their eyes, and they were like, look away, man, that's too bright. And I was like, but I don't have anything to look at, so I'm just going to look into your eyes. And I realized they had problems of their own, and I realized I'd lived in a beautiful part of the country, the vistas. I was too busy, you know, texting about them, or tweeting about them. But once I put the phone was gone. I was in pure heaven, and I can't help but think that the political pickle in which we find ourselves is, in a great way, related to that constant presence of those things. But again, that's something I explored in Super Sad True Love Story. But I hope that book wasn't about, you know, me saying, pick up a book. It was just, hey, here's a guy who likes books and is worried that they smell badly. No answers. Yes?
Do you think the essential of storytelling is an American story?
Is this an American story or a Russian story? This is the first time I've written a book that's not without a Russian protagonist. I mean, he's Jewish, so, you know, baby steps, right? Let's not go crazy. He's still from Queens, horrifying parents, the usual, yeah, but you know, it was the first time, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's a prominent Russian author, and she said, how the hell did you do it? I can't let go of this material, because it's so much of it, it's so much to process. But I think that's one reason why I wrote Little Failure when I did, is because I kind of wanted to have a fire sale. I wanted to get rid of all the, you know, after you read that, there's really nothing left for me to talk about in terms of my childhood. So I did want to, look, I've been living here long enough, you know, it's time to do an American novel without an immigrant protagonist, which actually isn't true, because Barry's wife, Seema, is Tamil, or her parents are from Tamil Nadu, and so, and she takes up maybe a third of the real estate. So there is, and then her parents factor in. So there is some immigrant stuff, but not Russian.
The money does not make you happy. It's an American tragedy.
The money doesn't make you happy. It's an American tragedy. Who knows at this point? You know, the globalized world, I mean, you know, in some ways, finance reminds me of Russian oligarchs and the kleptocracy there. The finance really reminds me of that, because it's, so much of it is, if not fraudulent, then at least it works with certain connections, the way that reminds me of the way that, you know, the Russian regime works as well. I'd always thought that after 1991 that Russia would become more and more like America, you know, the rule of law, freedom of expression, free markets, all these things would filter down. But quite the opposite happened. We became more like Russia, you know, with each step. So when I write these books, you know, it feels like I'm writing Absurdistan, but set in American soil, you know. And that scares the shit out of me, you know, and because I have a kid, and he has to live through all this. And, you know, I mean, the one thing my parents knew when to do was when to leave. I have to give them that. And they knew they had a chance. And the question I have, you know, because societies, as we know, can turn like that. Not just us, Western Europe as well. So when do you know when to leave? Yeah. Happy thoughts. All. I'm sorry, I'm a sap. I'm a Soviet Ashkenazi pessimist. I don't even believe the glass is half full. There's no glass. No glass. Yeah.
You just made reference to this as an American novel. Do you see this as a Jewish American novel? If not, not. But if you, to the extent that you do, Where do you see this in connection with contemporary Jewish American literature?
Where do I see this in connection with contemporary Jewish literature, and is this a Jewish novel? Yeah, I mean, I think when you have a protagonist who's Jewish, you could definitely classify it as a Jewish novel. I mean, Barry's Jewishness is a very nebulous thing. He gives to Israel. At one point, he talks about how his son is autistic and he's playing in the playground and he's having a rough time. He's too scared to go down a slide, and this Israeli woman says, "You have to be more courageous," to him. And the first thing he does is he runs home and he cuts his contribution to the Technion by 80%. And that's Barry in a nutshell, right? So that's Barry's Jewishness, and Seema in some ways is even more interested in Judaism than he is. She understands like concepts like tikkun olam and stuff like that. Interesting enough, my wife is also like, she's more into Judaism. I'm like, I served time. I did 8 years in yeshiva. I'm okay, but you can discover all you want, And my kid has to go for Rosh Hashanah, and I was like, yeah, go crazy. I'm on tour, but But is it a Jewish novel, and where does it fit in contemporary Jewish fiction? I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of novelists I really admire who write from a very Jewish perspective. Like, the Jewishness is baked into every single aspect of the story. Saffron Foer or Dara Horn, for example. And I think they really are, they know what they're talking about. Englander is lovely, a lovely man. He writes about Israel also in a very wonderful way. But for me, the question of Barry's Jewishness, it comes up, but it's not, I don't think it's everything in the novel. I think it is, I think Barry doesn't think that his Jewishness deserves to be hyphenated with American. I think he takes it on faith that he is purely an American set free in America. But there's a scene in the book which echoes very much something that happened to me. As I was traveling on the Hound. And that happened in around Louisiana, where these white supremacists got on board and started talking very loudly about crucifying Muslims and Jews, of which I fall into one category, obviously. And Barry gets off the bus, and I did as well in Shreveport, and Barry buys a New Testament coloring book and gets on the bus with this sort of, hey, Romans 2, as Trump would say, And so he feels for the first time in his life threatened for being a Jew, But that's just a part of it. The people on the bus, whom I quote in the book, also began to talk very loudly about, we were passing through Grambling State University, a traditionally African-American college. And so they were all these African-American college students, and clearly they didn't have this education, the white supremacists on the bus. And that upset them. I mean, I'm sure Obama's presidency also upset them, but that upset them to no end. And they started saying, well, they got their colleges, and someday we'll have ours. And I was like, what part of Dartmouth don't you understand? I mean, it was just such hogwash. But and this was the first time I heard Breitbart being mentioned out loud. And they were talking about Breitbart, and they also, everywhere I went in between the two coasts, people were telling me that Trump was going to win. And I kept saying, nah, come on, I mean, he's a sideshow. And people said, no, and people were they said, she's going to lose Pennsylvania. She's going to lose Wisconsin. I was like, come on, And so these people who were, who I thought were clownish, somehow had a feeling that to me was very suspect. So yes, there are moments in the book where Barry's Jewishness comes into relief, simply because for the first time in his life, he faces some really serious hatred. Yeah.
So to build on that, and also you alluded earlier to kind of the quant side of the hedge fund world, contrasting with the Wharton Rossi side.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering in your research what the distinctions there were, and particularly it seems to me like you have the Barry Cohen and Gary Parks, the Jews and the Asian Americans, stereotypically maybe on the quant side, very much don't fit in.
Yeah, I don't know, but it didn't fall down so neatly into those categories, because there were a lot of, I would say the lacrosse players are usually fall into the rainmaker role, and yeah, that is maybe more waspy Irish and that kind of stuff, but I met some Jewish rainmakers as well. And the quants were also a varied bunch. There were a lot of So it depended, some were well treated, the ones that had some kind of rainmaker side did pretty well. The others, a whole part of hedge funds was figuring out how many post-Soviet physicists you can squeeze into an ill-lit room, surrounded by whirling machines. That was a part of it too. But definitely having social skills was a huge plus. But probably the most successful fund right now, Renaissance Capital, which is Jim Simon, is a very interesting thing. Jim Simon is a mathematician, but he's also an incredibly well-spoken guy. He does. If you hear him speak, he's one of the smartest people ever. And so, if you can combine those two things together, then you're really taking a lot of people's money very quickly. There's a great book that I read called "Where Are the Billionaires?" Where are the customers' yachts? Right? So if you unpack that, so the money goes to the people, right? Yeah. Any last questions? Yeah. One more. Okay. Yeah.
As you were talking about, the research that you did for Lake Success, did it parallel in any way the research that you did for Superset, True Love Story, and kind of the Aubrey de Greys of the world, or kind of like how did that community? What were your takeaways from that community? And how did that relate?
Well, back then I researched some people in tech. Yeah, the parallels are huge. In fact, now these two worlds are sort of merging in slight ways through the entity known as fintech or financial tech. And some of the more interesting people I met are basically, physicists and mathematicians trying to make sure that the traders are out of the picture completely, that the banks learn the best from the traders. I'm sorry, the computers learn the best from the traders and just do their own thing. Hubris, I think, is the connective tissue. Hubris, the feeling that I am right. I am right. I am always right. When I lose $1 billion, I'm still right, because people will keep giving me money. This is the thing. Everyone I met has blown up. I've met people whose lifetime P&L, profit and loss, is negative $2 billion. They've lost $2 billion for their customers. They still think they're right. People still give them money. They're white males with lacrosse. And that shocked the crap out of me. Because it exposed the biases of the system, which are, if you are a certain way and we think you're smart, you say you're smart. You're a male who says you're smart. Here's your money, Originally, my idea was that the main character would be a woman. Now, first of all, in hedge funds, there are very few women. Most of them are sort of shoehorned into investor relations where they, and talk to investors and, are personable. But I did meet a few women who were portfolio managers. And they just weren't schmucky enough for my book. Because they didn't have this testosterone-driven approach to trading. They actually made money. Not a lot of money. They didn't make huge bets where you make $1 billion here and then you lose $3 billion the next day. Steady accretion that always beat the S&P by quite a bit. And I thought, all right, I'll invest money with you, but this is too boring for a book, But for the real cowboys, you needed to hang out with men whose moms didn't love them enough, with huge chips on their shoulders. That's not just me saying that. That's what they say about each other, So it was 3 years I would never want to repeat, but, I think I get it now. And when I walk through the streets of Manhattan, knowing how the sausage is made, it makes me feel a little ill. Thank you so much. Yeah, LA. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'll sign anything. Yeah.
And by the way, your son was a stylist. He's a doctor.